When an adult has gone through life with a diagnosis of ADHD, or perhaps been diagnosed later in life, it's challenging because those supports have to sort of come from, the person themselves. And so a big part of my work with adults is helping them to become more self-aware, helping them to become confident and owning their challenges and the wiring of their brains. And that can be really hard sometimes, because when you've gone through your life feeling like there's something wrong, I'm flawed in some way, I have these challenges, and there's almost a resistance to owning it, because it feels like you're bad. And so a big part of my coaching initially, but throughout my coaching with adults, individuals, is building up self-awareness, building that metacognition, that pausing, stopping and thinking about my thinking. What is it I'm doing? Is it working?
Hey everybody, welcome to Finding the Upside. Thank you so much for joining me today. I'm here in the studio for another interview with my favorite organization and time management expert, Annika Ahlstrom. Thanks for joining me, Annika.
It's great to be here. Thank you.
So Annika was here a few weeks ago, maybe actually even a couple months ago at this point, and we talked about ADHD and executive function. Just as an introduction, if you haven't listened to that first episode or didn't see that podcast episode, Annika has spent a lot of time in education and then working with children as a learning specialist for ADHD and executive function, and has a program that she works with families and children, and now has left traditional education and has developed her own coaching business for this specific purpose, but also supporting not just families and children, but supporting adults with ADHD. And that is the topic of this podcast. We talked a little bit about it last time you were here. But this time we want to talk about some of the nuances about the mindset and self-awareness and some of the struggles, and specifically with adults, some of the strategies that are really crucial. But I'd love for you to start with talking about this mindset shift of being able to embrace and own this diagnosis, this condition. I don't know how to talk about it correctly, so I'll just hand it over to you and let you kind of take us into that.
Yeah, so when a child is diagnosed with ADHD or their executive function challenges, hopefully there's supports from the parents and in school. Sometimes there's not. When an adult has gone through life with a diagnosis of ADHD, or perhaps been diagnosed later in life, it's challenging because those supports have to sort of come from, the person themselves. And so a big part of my work with adults is helping them to become more self-aware, helping them to become confident and owning their challenges and the wiring of their brains. And that can be really hard sometimes, because when you've gone through your life feeling like there's something wrong, I'm flawed in some way, I have these challenges, and there's almost a resistance to owning it, because it feels like you're bad. And so a big part of my coaching initially, but throughout my coaching with adults, individuals, is building up self-awareness, building that metacognition, that pausing, stopping and thinking about my thinking. What is it I'm doing? Is it working? Usually if they're coming to see me, there's some things that aren't working. So we need to look at, what are the things you're doing now? And if the things aren't working, we make shifts, we make changes, and that pause point becomes so important, because many people who have ADHD and have executive function challenges, they move through life and after they'll say, well, why did I do that? Or why didn't I do that? Instead of pausing in the moment or throughout the day to kind of regroup. And so that's actually a way you can learn to do that.
Yeah.
Right? That we can now rewire our brains. But it's not easy, and it's not
automatic.
comfortable, and it's not automatic because you've been doing it one way your whole life.
Yeah.
Now you're changing that, and that can feel uncomfortable, and that can feel a little bit robotic.
Yeah.
And so that's why working with a coach sometimes is really helpful, because I'm there to be really positive and supportive and to say, you're doing fine, and to stay curious, because it's so easy for people who have gone through life having these challenges to beat themselves up, you know, to say, oh, here I go again. I'm doing this again. Oh boy, you know, nothing's ever going to change. And I'm there to say it will change, but there's some changes that you have to make with consistency and commitment.
Yeah. And
you will see over time change. And it takes time. And the biggest part is really that relationship, you know, when I'm coaching someone, building that trust,
building that rapport,
and because if you think about it, if you've been going through life feeling badly about yourself and these things in your life that aren't working, it's very hard now to, you know, okay, I'm going to open up to my coach. I mean, it's almost like it's a therapeutic relationship in the sense of you're now learning to be vulnerable with another person. And so always in my first sessions and throughout, I'll remind my client, you know, if you feel that this isn't working, this relationship, please tell me, because if I can't be the person to help you, I would love to refer you to someone or help you find someone who can help you.
Right.
Because not everybody fits with everybody else.
Yeah.
So, you know, building that rapport takes some time.
Yeah. And
having them sort of bring down the veil, if you will, or the mask, as we call it, masking it and being vulnerable, I consider that a great honor when someone opens up to me. And it takes a little bit of time. Yeah. You know?
And I guess it would really be the same with any type of support, coach, therapist, whatever. There's time that needs to be built, and there's trust, and it is fit, as you said. But being able to build that rapport is what allows somebody to not be defensive or to kind of say, I'm safe here, and be able to kind of open up and be vulnerable. And as you said, one of the things I wanted to pick up on, you know, you're right, like so many negative messages. And I think I don't have the metric at the top of my head, but there's something like, and maybe you have it, like how many negative messages a person with ADHD gets throughout one day, even in just one day.
Yeah.
It's like in the thousands.
Yeah.
And so you're being faced with that. And then there's the self-judgment that you internalize that, and the negative self-talk, like you said, like, here I go again, or I'm bad at this, or I don't do well with. But maybe that's because the approach and the support and the way to do things and the reset and switching that hasn't happened yet.
Exactly. And I think also that piece of even being vulnerable with themselves, right? And we talk about that, the ownership, that takes some time to be able to really sit with this and say, this is really hard for me. You know, allowing yourself to do that takes some time to become self-aware. Yeah. And to give over to that process. So that's a big part of what I do with my clients, is really to build that, to even teach them, and you ask about strategies during the day, to literally map out a routine for themselves where they build in short pause points. So even that it's in front of them, I recommend having, you know, it on a whiteboard easel in front of you, or tagged up in front of you on your wall, a little schedule. And at certain times, you know, you can set reminders on your phone or have a timer. Certain times you stop and you do some breathing and you kind of land to say, how's it going? And building in these positive mantras of, I'm doing the best I can. I'm doing fine. Because that negative...
And reframing it.
Exactly. Because that negative self-talk has been going on for years. For years. Yeah. And so it's not like they meet with me and we flip a switch and now they're, you know, going to be positive about everything. That's not reasonable.
Yeah.
Right? So it's a
Yeah.
process, and that's why sometimes working with a coach can be beneficial, because I can be that sounding board for them. I can spend the time learning about them. Everybody's completely unique. So when people say, well, what are the strategies? What are the strategies? Well, I have to meet with you. I have to get to know you. I have to get to know your job. I have to get to know your personal life. What are the things that you're getting stuck on now, so that we can figure out a specific, tailored, individualized program for you.
Yeah.
Because not one size fits all.
No, and it has to be customized, right? If it's going to work.
Yep.
Yeah. And what I love about that is, I think that's so key, is first off, it sounds like what you're saying is that's the first part, is owning it and understanding it is the very first part, where then all of that vulnerability, you could be vulnerable, all of those veils, those masks come down, and then you can start really looking at it with brutal honesty, radical honesty, being able to look at yourself with compassion instead of judgment. Yeah. So I would imagine that that's got to be your first and foremost intention when you start working with someone. And the process of getting to know them, I guess you do a lot of intake, and first couple sessions probably have to be that getting to know and understanding.
We do a few self-assessments.
That's great.
So that they can really share with me what they're using.
Yeah.
What are the things that you're using now? And don't throw the baby out with the bathwater. Maybe there's some things that are working. Great.
Right.
Let's look at those. Let's see why they're working. And then build upon those.
Right.
Then I'll help you fill in the blanks of the other things that perhaps you haven't tried yet.
Yeah.
And so that's sort of how I begin working. I also talk a lot about this critical voice. And we actually do an exercise where I do a lot of mindfulness weaved into my sessions.
Yes.
Because I think that that's an incredibly wonderful way to get to that self-awareness. Slowing yourself down so that you can give yourself some space to learn about yourself, right?
Yeah.
And in those mindfulness sessions that are brief, because, not everybody can sit on a mountain for hours like Buddha. So they're very brief, but one of the first things that we do is I have them visualize their critical voice. And I have them, in their mind's eye, figure out the shape, the form, what that person's or that voice sounds like, give it a name. Then I have them open their eyes and they draw their critical voice, their judging voice. And I say, now you've externalized it. Now it's outside of yourself. So now when that voice comes in, not to banish it, not to be mean to it, it's a part of you. For some reason, it became a part of you at a time when you needed it. It came, so all these parts of ourselves are actually parts that we needed at some point.
Yes.
But right now it's getting in your way. So speak to that. And I have actually done it myself. My voice is spiky. She has spikes all over her face, her nose, her ears, her eyes. Everything is spikes. And she's constantly yelling at me, right? So now I've drawn Spiky. I have her up in my office on the wall. And when she comes in, I say, I know, Spiky, I know you mean well, but right now I don't need you, right? So that it's not pushing away.
Yeah.
It's, okay, thanks for showing up, but you can leave now. We're good. So along with that, we then do the visualization, and we also draw the voice of, reason, the voice that is going to be helpful to us, the kind voice, the voice that is gentle and also productive. And oftentimes people will draw a superhero, or they'll draw an angel, or there'll be
that's
some.
very powerful.
It's very powerful, and it makes it tangible for my clients. It makes it something that they can hold on to instead of just, I'm powerless. This thing is just taking me over.
Yeah.
So I love doing that because.
Yeah, and I think also the visualization of that and having those images then allow them to be accessed much more easily, right? So that's brilliant. I love that.
I didn't invent it. I wish I could say I did.
That's okay.
I stole it, but I love it. I think it's so great. And you know what it adds, which I'm getting from you now? Humor.
Yeah.
It adds humor because you know
levity.
What? Humor creates space.
True.
When we laugh, we take a deeper breath and we let life in.
Yeah.
And we let things shift. And so humor is a big part of this. So oftentimes the clients will draw these two voices and they'll laugh because they'll say, I love what I just created.
Yeah. Yeah, that's fantastic.
Yeah.
I love that.
Yeah.
So yeah, I mean, I think this owning it's interesting because I don't know if because this is in my, my radar, within my radar, or there's just a lot more talk about ADHD in adults today. Mm-hmm. There's so many high-profile people coming out talking about it. And I mean, we've known that for years, right? All the visionaries, all the innovative creatives. There's so many people that have either that or some kind of learning difference. But Mel Robbins is somebody who's been very vocal about her own adult ADHD, diagnosed as an adult. Jenna Kutcher is another one. They talk about this. They have their own podcast. And I remember listening and watching recently to one episode where Mel Robbins was talking about this exact thing we're talking about. The fact that there's this resistance to that it's part of you, that it's something that you own, and how necessary that is. It's kind of like, if you, God forbid, said you were diagnosed with cancer, you wouldn't be like, I don't have cancer. Part of being able to heal and part of being able to get treatment if you had cancer is to not be in denial about it. So why do we do this about a diagnosis like ADHD, right? It's understood why, but kind of thinking about it in that aspect, it makes sense that you had said owning it is the ability then to move on and to heal it, to not fix it, but manage it better, right. Thrive with it.
Right, with it. And
thrive with it.
And I think also in building that self-awareness and taking that ownership, you're building confidence.
Yeah.
So that, we're talking about adults in the workplace, and when you become aware and you take ownership, you become confident so that you can stand up for yourself and ask for what you need. Mm-hmm. And that's really the next step. Mm-hmm. If I find myself, with a client who has ADHD and has a lot of restless, they need to be moving more and they're stationary much of the day. Finding a way to bring up with their boss or their manager, you know how I would be most productive? If I could take a few breaks during the day and just go for a short walk, timing it. Or, is it possible that I might be able to get a standing desk? I would be more productive. If you lead that conversation with confidence and say to your boss or your manager, I would be more productive if, they want you to be more productive.
Yeah.
So it's all in how you say it.
True, very true.
And when you go in and say, I need a standing desk, then that's not going to make them jump off on the right foot towards meeting you. But if you feel confident and say, this is how I'm going to give you something,
right.
and the best of me,
right.
Now I want to give you that because I want the best of you. There's a reason you hired that person, probably for their creativity, probably for their great ideas, and along with that come some of these executive function challenges.
Yeah.
So how do we embrace the whole person?
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. And, and we touched on this, I think, the last time we spoke, but I definitely want to bring this up again. The good thing is there is a lot of attention to this neurodivergence. And neurodivergence just mean that it's outside, quote unquote, the norm of doing things. And in business, although there's been lots of discussion of neurodiversity, we're all neurodiverse, we're all different, right? But that tends to, in the past, have been stuck with, the diversity efforts, stuck with race and gender and sexual orientation and things like that. But really, it also has to include this neurodivergence in terms of normativity. Like, what is that, right? And people who sit outside that. Why? Because of all the things you just mentioned. To be able to create a safe space so somebody can be at their best and produce the best for you,
right.
Which, what's interesting to me is you talked about the standing desk. The standing desk has been around for a while, but it was all in the sense of ergonomics, right? But because sitting all day is not good for us, right? So if we can end up standing and being able to shift our weight instead of sitting, it's better for the body. But it's also better for the mind in some minds, right? There's desks that have actually a bike,
yep.
Right? And those types of things. There's actually a woman that I saw recently. She stands at her desk and does training, and webinars and things, and she's walking on a treadmill. Like, it's underneath her desk, which I think is so interesting. So it's counter, right, to like what typical business structure 30 years ago was doing. Now it's kind of come in and been there, but now we're kind of seeing, okay, well, there's different ways to, different reasons why you would provide this, and being able to understand that is important, but also from the perspective of the person, being able to ask for that in that way. Right. So I think the good news is, I guess the point I'm trying to make is that there's lots of conversations happening about these types of things. So I think there's hope, there's hope in that, that it will become more brought into the fold. But I would agree with you that being able to speak about that in a way that you get what you need so that you're more productive makes all the sense.
Absolutely.
In the world.
And I would say, too, in that journey of working with my clients, some clients get there quicker than others. Mm-hmm. Some have had a lot of, I want to say, almost trauma with, the way they've been treated and the way they've been spoken to about their ADHD, about their challenges. And so it may take longer for them to get to that point where they're going to ask for something. Yeah. But in the meantime, you can still work on that self-awareness and work on that building of confidence so that they will get there. Mm-hmm. And that's, a similar trajectory to how I work with young children.
Well, and there's no secret. We said it last time. You worked with my son for many years. It's funny because I think he's on that end of that curve. That being able to get to that point where he can kind of drop that veil and own that. I think you're right. I've watched him struggle with doing that, and I think it's individual. So every person, he had a lot of trauma of the way he was treated in school, which I know is. The sad part about it, but unfortunately it happens every single day. And what that does to somebody, I guess the point here is knowing that could be their story, that person, that employee that's in front of you, or that business partner that's in front of you. That could be their story, and being able to understand that on the other end of it, but also as a person, understanding that all of that is what's feeding into all the negative self-talk, and almost more important, why you've got to be able to flip that switch and come to accept.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Absolutely. And I think also feeling like you're not alone. Yes. There's so many resources out there. There's so many great podcasts, webinars, free resources on from organizations like CHAD and ADDA.
I think support groups for people with ADHD would be a great thing to start.
They have
they
them.
Do?
Yeah, on Facebook, they have them. There's
so
many resources. And so, and that's that journey of self-awareness. That's that journey of starting to connect and not feeling alone and not feeling that shame that is at the core of so much of this.
Well, what's interesting, and this is the thing, like, who would have thought, in my mind, who would have thought that there would be so many parallels? I had my coach, Mandy Keene, on a couple weeks ago, and she was talking about support groups, just support groups in general, and talking about her reaching out and getting support for something, and what it does, and what it did for her, and this is the general sense, the broad sense, is that it allows you to see that you're not alone. Like, hey, Frank, that happens to me too. And it actually is the bridge. This is how she put it. It's the bridge to the self-compassion, because you get to know those people in the support groups, and you're cheering on Frank, and you're like, hey, Frank, buddy, I know, I understand. Hey, Jane, I know, like, it's tough. We're here for you. And then you realize they have the same struggles that I do. And if I'm compassionate for them, why aren't I compassionate for myself who have those same struggles? So it's almost like the bridge in realizing and being able to be self-compassionate to yourself. So I think that, like, you say there's a lot of them. I guess I haven't looked, but I think that, it would be great if we could connect people more to those.
Yeah, I agree. So much growth happens there. And also, like you're saying, oftentimes I'll say when people, I'll say, please tell me what those thoughts are saying. And they're harsh.
Yeah.
And I'll say, would you ever speak that way to a friend?
Right.
Would you ever use that language with a friend?
Yes.
Why are you using that with you?
Yeah.
With yourself, you know? And, you know, when you put it that way, it's like, wow, I'm really cruel to myself. And I'm not just saying that's, you know, those are my clients. I share about my own story.
Well, I think that's a human condition, right?
Yeah.
No matter what our challenges are.
We have that critical voice.
Yeah.
It's in there, that judging voice.
Yeah.
So, you know, it's a matter of understanding, wow, I can change that. I can change that script in my brain, but I have to work at it. And as I said, you know, in the beginning, I actually have my clients write it down, certain periods of the day, because you can't meet with me once or twice a week and think that that's just going to change. That's not the case.
Yeah, I mean, that's really critical.
Yeah.
That awareness. And the other thing, going back to what you said at the opening with that check-ins throughout the day, you know, I think that's really powerful as well, because it's almost like, I don't know if I'm going to describe this succinctly right now, but you know, you kind of do things, especially as an adult, you do things the way you've been doing them for so many years, and it's kind of rote, and you don't even think about it. And you also don't even think about the fact that it's not working.
Right.
Right? Like, so the only way that you can kind of assess that is to pause and kind of look at, what am I doing?
Right.
Is it working? What's working? What isn't?
Right.
And then I think, obviously, having the support to work with somebody who can say, this is something else you can try, because I think a lot of us might say, this isn't working, I always struggle with this, but you don't know what else to do, right? Like that's the next step, is what do I do in place of that? I have no idea, right? So getting those suggestions and getting that customized kind of plan and strategies has got to be a critical part of the growth that happens.
Absolutely. And building in, you know, a structure, so getting to know what does the day look like for a specific client, and then within that, you know, setting up a routine. These are the things that are going to be really helpful for you to, first of all, bookend, but even within that routine, where are there going to be these pause points? Where am I going to have, you know, periods of work? What does my workspace look like, right? Put away the distractions. Put away your phone, unless you really need it.
That's a big struggle today.
Yeah, because multitasking is toxic to your brain. And so if you're going into deep focus on a project, or you need to really focus on something at work or at home, you know, put away the distractions. You know, even looking at your workspace, what's on the walls. If you have
what's pulling your eye.
Yeah. If you have a zillion things on the walls and it's not serving you, simplify. You know, what do you need on your desk? Do you actually need all of this out? And make sure that at the end of the workday, you leave the desk the way you want to find it in the morning. And I even recommend, you know, saving the last 15 minutes of the day to look at what I have tomorrow. Yeah. And leave that on your desk, so that when you come in the morning, it's almost like being kind to your future self. I've taken care of myself for tomorrow, which is so powerful if you think about it.
Yeah. And you know what? These are things that have been suggested, you know, in my world, in the business world and productivity, to people universal, whether you have ADHD or not, right? Yeah. But I think I would agree that people who are struggling to have that order and structure need that even more, right?
Right.
And somebody with an ADHD brain, like, memory doesn't serve, right? It's kind of like being able to brain dump everything. I know for myself now, I mean, in true candor, I have, you know, I'm in my 50s. I have not been diagnosed with ADHD. We didn't have that growing up. Kind of that wasn't talked about. Could I relate to some things? Absolutely. And I know for myself, what's completely freeing is exactly that, setting myself up and also getting it out of my head. Because when it's all those things to remember, it's like I'm paralyzed. It's like if I can just get it on paper or in a note in my phone, just brain dump it. It's so freeing. And you said be kind to your future self. That's kind of how I look at that activity. Yeah. Which is so helpful to then have like a, you know.
And you know you've set yourself up in the morning rather than, you know, being harried coming in. What do I have? You know, now you're behind the eight ball, you know. And you've set yourself up for success. Now, will things come in your way that you couldn't anticipate? Of course, that's life, right? But at least I've taken care of all the things that I can to set myself up for success. Yeah. Another thing that I highly recommend is having an accountability partner at work, someone that you can check in with throughout the day, and perhaps they also have these types of challenges. So maybe you say, 2 times a day, I'm going to stop by and see how you're doing on your stuff, and you do the same. Having a partner,
checking in,
because accountability is a big part of this.
Yeah,
we know that many of us, myself included, and certainly those who have executive function challenges and ADHD, we have a hard time sticking to things. So being accountable to ourselves hasn't always worked. But when we have another partner, it's like when you're going to go exercise, and you say, "Oh, I'm going to exercise tomorrow," but I have a good friend that I go swimming with. But when she calls and says, "I'll pick you up in 10 minutes," I'm not going to say no to that.
Yeah.
Yeah. So
accountability is great in so many areas, and I would agree in this area as well. It's a great support.
Yeah.
So we've talked about, really having that self-awareness and owning kind of this condition, this learning difference, whatever it is, and doing that work. But then what are like the other areas that you would say are part of the strategies that you provide? I would imagine it's like time management. What are some of the key areas?
Yeah, so the time management piece is key. That being able to really get yourself, again, it's building in that metacognition, planning out. When do I need to leave the house so that I'm on time for work or my meeting or whatever it is? And I always used to joke that if I had to be in the car at 8 o'clock in the morning, I would walk out at 8 and I would have things going through my mind like, let me just put in a load of laundry, as if that didn't take up any time. Well, then I wasn't in the car until 8:15. So I build in a 15-minute leaving time, and I start to leave at 7:45. Now I can put in that load of laundry or whatever my thing is at the end there and still be in the car by 8. So learning, how to play with your own brain so that you're on time. Because when you're walking in, if you're supposed to be at work at 9 and you're walking in at 9, you're actually late. Because by the time you get yourself settled, you put your things away, it's 9:05, 9:10. You have to start really setting yourself up for success. And then in terms of time management, like I said, having that day planned out, having those pause points built in,
right,
and having it in front of you, having it visible. Because as we know, if it's on another, tab, you have to go to it. And you might get distracted by something else. But if it's right in front of you, in your eyesight of vision, it's harder to ignore.
So time management, of course, is a key thing for all people, right?
Yeah.
But why is it so challenging for people with ADHD and executive function challenges? And you just said it has to be visible. That's part of it. I know you have lots of different strategies, but just talk about that. I think you've called it time blindness.
Yes.
And talk about that, and then why the strategies help to try to solve that in terms of it being visible and thinking about it ahead of time. And just talk about that a little bit.
So time blindness, meaning that you really don't have a good sense of time, right? And so it's either now or it's not now.
And that's it.
Yeah, and that's it. And so you're going to run into some trouble with now and not now, right? So if it's not in my sight of vision, it's going to be out of sight, out of mind, and I'm not going to think about it. But it's going to catch up with me. And so if I keep something in front of me, and I don't mean having 50 things in front of me, I mean having one place where I have the day's like
things, a run of the day.
Yeah.
All your appointments, all your things, all your times.
And
slots.
what I like about, there's this whiteboard with timer. It's a stand-up small whiteboard. I have one. I fill it out every day with the main things that I have to do that day. Okay, the big things. And then I put a little time circle estimate. Say it's an hour. Say it's an hour and a half. Now I set my timer to see, am I accurate? Because time management is a real challenge for Annika. That's a real challenge for me. I know it. So if I'm not on track, I will completely spend 3 hours on something that needed to be done in an hour because I'm fascinated by it or, I'm drawn into it. which is great, but not so great if I'm missing 2 other things, right? So that the visible becomes so important for someone who has time management challenges. Having an analog clock in front of you.
Why is analog so important?
Well, I'm glad you asked, Maria. Analog clocks give you that 12-hour cycle, right? Our children are at such a disadvantage because they may have learned how to tell time on an analog clock in 1st or 2nd grade, and then it was promptly put on the shelf. And they were using digital, right? Well, digital only gives you now. So if you already struggle with now and not now, right, that's a problem.
Yeah.
You need to see that 12-hour cycle to root yourself in, oh, here's where I am, and this is how much, I can see how much time I have until lunch, until dinner, until bedtime, and I start to make that a part of my internal time management. And that becomes really important because otherwise it's just this digital now in relation to nothing. It's
and there's
not grounded.
No visual tangibility to time.
Right, and there's nothing grounding it, right? So our children, I hear this all the time from parents, my child has no sense of time. Well, did we set them up for success with analog clocks so that they can learn what it looks like an hour?
Yeah.
Right, an hour, unless you concretize an hour, it falls right through your fingers.
Oh, I love that word, concretize. Yes.
Right? Yes. So these become so important. And so I always say, put an analog clock, not behind you in your office, put it right in front of you. I actually have one in my sight line of my laptop because even looking up to the right, if I'm immersed in something, I'm not going to look there.
Yeah.
But if it's in my sight line, now it's right in front of me. So again, calendars, having calendars up for, September through December now. Visual, so that I can see the passage of time.
And it's funny because, for years, right? And some people in business still do this, and I've gone back to it now. Like, I definitely was conditioned by, didn't grow up with that, obviously had an analog clock, was taught that, had calendars on the wall, all those things. And in the working world, when I started, we always had something on our desk that had the day and the date, and you'd flip it, the individual day calendar, and that was right in front of you. And then we always had the 3-month calendar on the wall that we would write and map things out, and you saw that visual. And then computers came into all this, these electronic calendars, and we had Blackberries, and now we have iPhones and all this, and all of that went away for a lot of people, and for me included, and then realized I need the visual. So I do keep stuff electronically, but I need to see that visual. Like, I have all the time blocking with the different colors, and I can print it out. And sometimes I need to, because I need to see it. And I think that's what you've talked about is, having those type of calendars and physical, tangible things, so you can see. I'm giving you the lead in here, the space in your time. Right? The space in your time. And also, people will say, but it's on my computer. Great. But there's a reason you called me, right? Something's not working here. And we need to go back to, it's not as exciting as the digital. I think that, everybody thinks that's the cool way. That's the hip way of doing things. But it's not working for everybody, right? It's working for some people. And if it works for you, we're not here to dismantle something that works. But the point is, people are calling me because there's an issue. There's a problem, and they want a better way. And oftentimes that can be simplifying and having things to be physical, like calendars, like planners, like analog clocks. You can swipe them all day long, but that's all they are. You know what I mean? Like, people will say, well, I have a timer on my phone. Great. But if I pick up my phone, this is what I do, and I see someone's texted me, now I'm texting for 5 minutes. Now I'm, you're pulled away.
I'm playing a game. Now I'm buying shoes.
It's
now I'm buying shoes. I mean, it's a beautiful piece of brilliant technology. And I can have so much information at my fingertips. But when it comes to time management, organization, and planning, I go down rabbit holes. I get lost. And many of my clients, it's the same thing. And so it's kind of going back to basics.
Right. And what's interesting too is I think a lot of the tools, and I definitely can vouch for this, like, I exclusively use an Outlook calendar, and I have color-coded things, And that actually helps me plan because as I try to fit in and squeeze in another task, not just appointments, another task, and you're like, oh, I can do this here. You're like, oh, I only have 30 minutes there. It's really going to take longer than 30 minutes. So it's like it can't fit.
Right.
But again, it is digital, but it's visual because I'm seeing of how things flow to one another and where it could fit. And what I think is interesting is now all of these tools that are out there, you have Notion, you have InMotion, you have all these things that create this space in my time calendar. Space in my time calendar is something that Annika uses and teaches, which is essentially time blocking on a paper sheet or a physical sheet, right? Blocked out all the commitments.
Right.
But it does essentially that now, these electronic tools in that way, as long as you can have this visual and that it's up. And I see people now, that's their screensaver. They put up the thing for the week or for the day so they can see it. So I think that's promising, right? To use these people that are like, well, I want to use the digital stuff. Great.
Yep.
But you need to use it in a different way. It can't be, okay, I have to go look at it.
Right.
It has to be in front of you.
Right.
And I find for me, that's like game changer.
Yep.
As long as I have that in front of me and I see. And listen, there are times where I have to pick stuff up and move it around. But that's the beauty, is that when it's not in something visual, it's hard to do that. It just gets lost.
Gets lost. It's out of sight, out of mind. And the other thing that I wanted to say is often those people who have executive function challenges and ADHD, they love novelty, right? So constantly, you mentioned there's so many new things. And so they're always going for the next, new shiny thing. This is going to work for me.
Yeah.
This is going to work for me. And it's exciting, but if you're constantly chasing the next, shiny new thing that's going to work for you, you're never actually settling in and owning and trying something consistently, because you're always going, that looks better, I'm going to try that. You know what I mean? So that becomes something that can be a real problem. Whereas I said, like, when you have these visual tools and you stick to a certain way of doing things, whatever it is, it's great that outlook works for you. But it doesn't work for everybody that way. And maybe they need to find a tailor-made program or routine that works for them.
So as you address time management, and this is you've talked about self-awareness and, owning things, that's the first part. And then talking about time management, all these different strategies. If someone is ingrained in wanting to use something electronic, do you find ways to help them utilize that and tweak and see? And then I would imagine the intelligent thing to do, and probably what you help them do, is, how is it working?
Exactly.
And sometimes they might come to understand it's not.
Exactly. But if someone says to me, I really want to use this, I will never say no. I always say, I wish I could live in your brain for 24 hours.
Right.
Because then I could see the world from your perspective.
As you said, everybody needs something different.
Right. And so if you really want that, we will continue to look for ways to make that work. But at some point, because we're constantly checking in, as you know, we do a check-in and we do a check-out.
Yes.
Right? That's building that metacognition.
Yeah.
Right. So that in the check-in, we're talking about what strategies have you used this past week? How are they working? What's getting in your way? And I always say, please don't ever come to a session and think that I'm judging you.
Right.
Just put that to the side, because the only thing I am is curious. I'm curious about what got in the way if you didn't do something you said you were going to do. So, and I think also when I'm that sounding board for them of, I'm not judging you, they're less likely to judge themselves and get curious.
I think that element, and I mean, I've been through this with you, obviously, working when we went through the program with my son alongside. I think what's really good, and just in general with self-assessment, people are much more honest when they're writing it down and they're reflecting themselves. And the way you typically run it is you ask people to do that in the check-in, write it down first, and then share.
Right.
Which I think is critical, because if you just ask somebody the question, they sometimes might be saying, what does she want to hear? What do I need to say?
Right.
Where doing it in that way, checking in and checking out individually and then share, is a great bridge to make sure that they're actually able to have that honesty.
Right, and that they're also able to articulate it for themselves. Right?
Yeah.
So I am merely there to guide a person. I always believe people know a lot more than they actually think they know.
Oh, yeah.
And oftentimes they just need me to hold the space for them
Yeah.
so they can find a way.
Right.
And sometimes I offer, of course, suggestions or strategies, but people are so much smarter than they think they are.
Right.
And it's really holding the space for them so that they can find their way to what works for them.
Which is the foundation of coaching, which
Exactly.
is so awesome. Yes.
And I always consider, like I said earlier, such an honor to be able to work with someone who opens themselves up and is vulnerable with their challenges and also with their successes. You know, when a client, has a success with something, I say celebrate all the small wins and the big ones.
Yeah.
But celebrate them, because oftentimes we see the things that, don't work for us, we beat ourselves up way more than when we have a win.
Yeah.
And so celebrating that with a coach or with another person, like I'm working with a gentleman now, and we had our second session yesterday, and after our first session, he shared that he sat down with his wife and said, I'm always telling him, or always in the time we've met, be kind to yourself, because he's so hard on himself. And he had shared that with his wife. And she said, I've been telling you that for so long.
And you didn't listen.
No, because I think sometimes people that are so close to us,
Yeah.
like my
Oh,
daughter,
yes.
my daughters always used to say,
Yeah.
well, you're just saying that because you're my mother.
Yes.
Or
they just don't hear it
Yeah.
from somebody close to them.
Exactly.
And they'll take it in and hear it from
Yeah.
somebody external.
Yeah.
So that's awesome. So now I know the next piece is planning, which part of this is like a lot of these are interrelated, but planning and like planning, you talked about the simple example of, leaving the house, but like planning for projects, planning for, I think I could attest to, when somebody with ADHD or executive function challenges thinks about a project, they minimize how much, and this is just like project management in general, or lack of project management skills in general. You minimize how long it's going to take and what are all the pieces. So that's, I think, the next phase of what you might work on with somebody and give them different strategies for planning and how to get things done.
Yeah, so planning is a big one, and the big projects, like you mentioned, many of my clients have a really hard time understanding how long something will take. So I teach them a strategy called planning backwards and assigning time.
Yeah.
And it's a great way to really break a large project into smaller chunks so that it feels manageable, so that I actually have them draw it out on small Post-it notes, the steps, and we plan backwards. And what's so effective about that strategy is the very first thing they do is draw a picture of themselves completing the project. So anyone who works with visualization, whether it be in sports or business or medicine, whatever it is, seeing yourself be successful is the beginning of success.
Yeah.
Right? I'm seeing myself score that goal or make that basket or finish that thesis or project. I'm drawing that out.
Yeah.
Now it's going to happen. I've made a commitment to myself that I'm going to do a good job on this, and now I plan backwards. And they often are shocked at how long something's going to take. I also have them buffer in time. I say, listen, if you don't need that buffer time, great. You just won an extra 5 hours.
Right.
But let's put it in there, because the one thing they haven't figured out yet in this amazing world we live in is how to get back time, right?
Nobody's figured that out.
We've got a finite amount of it,
Yeah.
and we want to use it well. And so,
And once it's gone, it's gone.
And once it's gone, it's gone. And if you crunch yourself to the point where you're so stressed, your brain is not working well.
Yeah.
And you might get to finish it, but it's not going to be your best work.
Yeah.
You're going to be anxious. You're going to feel bad. You're not going to be sleeping,
Doesn't
eating.
feel good.
No, it doesn't feel good. So that's a great strategy. I also think when you then have mapped out that larger project, putting it on your calendar visibly in front of you, ticking off the days as they go so you can see, I'm getting closer to this project.
That
deadline.
helps with feeling like you're getting somewhere.
Yeah. Otherwise, it's just,
And the small
that's
steps.
that's in 2 weeks. Yeah, but if you don't concretize it, what is 2
Concretize
weeks?
it. Oh my God, we have to make a bumper sticker for that.
There it comes again, concretize. And the other thing that is so crucial to planning is, because many people will procrastinate, myself included, and I say set a timer for 20 minutes and just start. You can do anything for 20 minutes because you know it's going to be over in 20 minutes.
Yeah.
Oftentimes, it's
You'll go
just
beyond it.
starting it.
Yeah.
That's the thing.
Yeah.
And if you only do it for 20 minutes, at least you started it. Now you pat yourself on the back and say, tomorrow I'm going to do another 20 minutes, and so on and so forth. But many times people will say, oh my goodness, I was telling myself this is going to be awful, and it wasn't bad at all. In fact, I really enjoyed it. So these voices that we have coming in telling us, oh, this is going to be awful. I'm going to pass out. That's not the case.
Many times, and I know, and I do want to ask you this question, but many times I know that I've done this myself. Matter of fact, I think I just did it the other day where I was like, agonizing over something, right? Like, I got to do that. I got to do that. I got to do that. It took 5 minutes.
Yeah.
Like, we create this story in our head that's going to be awful, that it's going to take forever, that it's going to, and if we just say, all right, let's just do this, you realize, really didn't take that long and it wasn't so bad.
Right. And that's why, I don't know if you remember the exercise of the time scientist.
Yes.
Where we, it's an actual, strategy of mapping out, writing small things. How long is it going to take to empty the dishwasher? I give an estimate and then I actually time it. And I look at it and I go, this took 5 minutes.
Yep.
But I was telling myself that, poor me, I've got to empty the dishwasher.
Yeah.
It's going to be a disaster.
Yeah.
It's going to take all night.
And that estimates and estimating also works that way, where it's like, okay, I'm over dramatizing how long this is going to take and see this isn't accurate, and I underestimated how long this is going to take and it really took longer. And then you get so much better. And we use that even in my organization with my team. Like, I tell them all the time, like, we have a tool that we use for estimating how long you think this will take, and then for tracking how long did it take and why. Not that I want to micromanage that, but I want to get better at us optimizing our time and really being honest about how long something is going to take, so that we can maximize what we're going to do and not try to cram too much in. That's what it's for as well.
And also learning those times during the day when your brain is at its optimal level to work.
Oh, so where you're tanked, but also where you're good.
Yeah. Where you're energized, where you feel good. Yeah. And knowing, and this is, again, self-awareness, knowing when, I need to put this down and just take a walk around the building.
And know that.
Or, just sit and do some mindful breathing. But oftentimes I say move, because move a muscle, change a thought.
Oh, yes.
Right? It's another good one.
That is good.
Yeah.
So we don't have too much more time, but I wanted to ask 2 other questions. Just the last piece of the big category I think that you work on is organization, and just organizing materials, organizing your day, organizing your house. That tips into so many areas. Yeah. And I guess that you approach it in the same way, that's the category you assess and do the intake of maybe all the things that are getting in the way for that person in that area, and then different ways to solve that. Talk about that just a bit.
Yeah. So, again, I think I briefly touched on, the organization of your workspace, making sure that you have the things in front of you that you need and nothing more. Yeah. And leaving it the way you want to find it in the morning. Be kind to your future self. Take the last 15 minutes of the day, set a timer, and use that to set yourself up. So you come in the next morning. I do this myself, at home, in terms of my workspace. Yeah. And I'll fill out, my day for the following day. And I know this sounds really corny, but I come in the morning to my office, and I work at home now, and it's almost like
it's pleasant.
I'm almost like, oh, Annika, thank you so much for setting. Like, I'm almost playing like a little role of like talking to myself. Well, how pleased I am that I took care of myself.
Yeah, and I also think that just talking about setting up your workspace in an organized way, right? You're taking care of yourself, but it's also a different feeling. And I know there's a lot of people, because I even though this is not something that I is a signature for me, obviously in my work as a coach and consultant and working with clients and working in offices, sometimes their offices are a disaster, and they are in denial that that's getting in their way. They're like, oh no, I work well like this. No, you can't. You cannot. I'm sorry. You can't, right? So, making the awareness of that, I think, is also important. And also, I lost my train of thought. You're going to have to edit this. Totally forgot what I was going to say.
in terms of talking about that, and while you're trying to figure out what you were going to say, it's also this piece of there's some resistance there, right? There's some resistance there. And that's, again, ownership. So I say, mess outside your body creates a mess inside your mind.
Yes.
And I plant that seed, but someone says, no, you know what? It looks messy, but I can find anything whenever I want to. And I'm thinking, there is no way. I've played that little reindeer game too, where I've told myself, oh, it's actually organized, in piles.
So that's the self-awareness. It all comes, that threads through all of those areas. Yeah. And what I was going to mention as like an example is, if you go into using a medical, a doctor's examination room, right? You go in there and everything is in its place. They open the drawer, they have the cotton swabs, they have everything in its place, everything's refreshed, they're able to easily access everything. What if you went in there and be like, I'll be right back, I gotta get a tongue depressor. I'll be right back, I gotta get some cotton swabs. I'll be right back, I need to get alcohol. It's so inefficient and disruptive as well.
And upsetting as a patient. That happened to me once at a dentist.
Right. So thinking about your workspace like that, everything is easily within reach. Yeah. You have everything you need, so everything runs smoothly, and you could be at peace instead of scattered. I think that's part of it too.
It's huge. And it's self-care.
Yeah.
It's about self-care.
So the last question that I want to ask you is this. You brought up a lot of examples of your own personal experience and things you do. And I want to bring this out and ask this question. You have not been diagnosed with ADHD or executive function, correct?
No.
But you still have some of these same challenges?
Absolutely.
And I think that that's an interesting point as well, that a lot of us share these challenges or struggles. They show up in the very same way and sometimes are solved by the very same strategies. Talk about that a bit.
Well, I think that that's a big part of my approach in coaching is to be very transparent about the fact that I struggle with these things. And every time I teach, I've been doing it, for 10 years now, every time I work this program, I get better at it. And so I think that also opens a connection, makes a connection and a bond with my clients because they don't feel like, oh, I'm this organization over here who was born with these things. That's annoying, right? I can say, you know what? I do the same thing you do.
Right.
I have that same drawer in my kitchen that's like a piling center, and every so often I've got to set a timer and go through it and organize it because it ends up just being a pile of stuff, right? And so, I think that everybody benefits from this. Everybody. So when I work with, say I work with a couple or I work with a family, oftentimes the spouse who doesn't have ADHD is thrilled because now we're going to help their partner, or the father doesn't have ADHD but the mother does, and he's there to fix her. But as in the course of working together, they start to realize, oh my gosh, I grew so much, and I don't even have these things, but there's always a better way. We can always grow and try new things and get better at this. And so, that's about owning it as well. Yeah. I'm not perfect. No one is. Yeah. Right?
Well, I think that's also helpful to as you said, you're not, Miss Perfect Judgy, right?
No.
You're in the boat with them, and you sit outside of that diagnosis or that learning difference or what have you. So I think that can make it also much more accessible for the person to say, that's the other thing. These are life skills.
Yeah.
These are life skills.
That's what we know, yeah.
Right? And these are things that everyone has to master and find their way. Some of us figure it out along the way, and some of us still struggle with a specific thing that we just haven't found that secret sauce yet to fix. So I think it's so interesting how everybody can benefit from everybody could benefit from these strategies.
Yeah, and I think it's also important to realize that things can change, right? Say you get a new job.
What used to work doesn't work.
Right, well, say you get a new job. Now I've got other challenges that I need to work on here, or this used to work but now it doesn't. So you're constantly staying curious and self-aware enough to say, what do I need now? And that is where, again, coming back to the beginning of this discussion, that self-awareness, that ability to build in these pause points so I can reflect and see what is it I need now, because it's changing all the time. I'm not the same person I was yesterday or last year or 5 years ago, and I won't be the same moving forward. So that flexibility, which is another executive function. If you're a very, very rigid person, this is tough, right? But knowing that about yourself helps to create some space around it, so you can say, yeah, I'm flexible and I own it. Now what? You know what I mean? Like it's a constant juggling of, you know, what do I want to try, and how do I want to grow? And that's what's so exciting about what I do, because I get to be a part of that.
Right,
and I get to grow with them.
Absolutely. Well, this has been so amazing. Thank you again for joining me. We're going to put in the show notes. Annika has a program that she's developing, and some of this framework that you talked about, some of these strategies, these areas of self-acceptance and mindfulness and owning, and the metacognition. I think that's so important. Time management, planning and organization. Definitely check out the show notes for ways to contact her. You're both on Instagram and Facebook, correct?
Only Instagram.
Only Instagram. Timewise 12, but it'll be in the show notes.
And timewise.life is my website.
Perfect. We'll put all that in the show notes for you. Thank you so much for joining me.
Thank you.
I look forward to seeing you all on the next episode of Finding the Upside. Thanks for listening or watching today. See you then.